Hello and welcome back to Analog Comics. It's time for the next segment of my video series about the history and the inner workings of European comics. This time the subject is a Belgian comics writer, Jean Van Hamme. He's one of the most successful comics creators from the Franco-Belgian comics scene. While many creators wish to get that one character or a series that would provide them a long career and enough money to support their family, Jean Van Hamme didn't do just one or two. He made 3 of them. He has written scripts for over 130 comics and sold tens of millions of albums. As an example, Thorgal series alone has sold around 18 million copies, translated roughly to 20 different languages. And that figure doesn't even take into account many spin-offs from that series. And it keeps selling around 400,000 copies each year. Jean Van Hamme has also written books, the ones without pictures, screenplays and adaptations, and he's been involved in all kinds of creative processes. Some of his comics have been adapted into movies, and he has received probably all possible awards and honors a comics writer in Europe can get. But that's all you need to know about them now, because I'm only going to focus on the comics. That alone is a big subject to go through. And because his oeuvre is that large, I'm not going to do a deep dive into each of them here. I'm aiming to do a more focused video on each of them later. I also need to mention that at the time of making this video, I have not read all of his albums that are available in English. Some of them have been hard to get to Finland, and I've been looking for a new reliable source to order from. But let me lift this one. I have read enough of Van Hamme's comics to know why he has such a large fan base. I'm clearly one of them. For me, Jean Van Hamme is one of those creators that have his own section in my comic book shelf. My goal with this video is to point a finger at a very successful European comics writer who has a really unique style. His stories has a voice that I haven't encountered in anyone else's writing. It's a bit like music. All the composers, they're using the same notes available to them, but some of them always manage to come up with something that is from them. It's like a signature that cannot be faked. And for me, Jean Van Hamme is the same thing. He's using the same notes as everybody else. He is not reinventing the wheel, but his stories have a definite different flavor than the others. Some of the signature elements that I enjoy in his writing are the cinematic settings and structure and the moral ambiguity of the protagonist that makes the stories always that much more alive and lifelike. And then there is the wordiness. He's known to be a bit wordy with lots of text in the panels, but his wordiness serves and advances the stories. You don't feel like you're being forced to read something because the writer didn't find any other way to express that info. You want to read that exposition to get deeper into the story. It's an important layer that makes the whole story just more meaty. I do know that not everyone agrees on this matter. Wordiness can be a fatal feature for a comic's success. Too much bad or too obvious exposition can kill the reader's enthusiasm. Also, some of the readers consider that a lot of text in a comic book is automatically a sign of an unskilled writer. But in Van Hamme's stories, the words, even when there's a lot of them, they just enrich the experience. I wanted to specifically shine a light to this particular detail because I'm one of those readers who are easily put off by lots of text, like big boxes full of empty words. But I have to say, I only focused on this feature in Van Hamme's writing after another reader pointed it out. Before that, I was just hooked to know more, what's in the next page. But taking a few steps back from the fandom and looking at it more objectively, yes, he is wordy. There can be very wordy pages, and then they can be splash pages without almost any text. So it's not something that he feels that he always has to do, only if it serves the story. If you're just getting into European comics, Jean Van Hamme is definitely one of the creators worth checking out. You see, Jean Van Hamme has also this very special sense to find very special artists for his projects, meaning that through his stories you get to see amazing European art page after page. Personally, I split Jean Van Hamme's work into 3 camps. The first one includes his 3 mega successful series: Thorgal, XIII and Largo Winch. These are the comic series that Van Hamme is most known for. The second one holds the rest of his comics that have been translated into English, most of which are available through Cinebook. Third one holds those Van Hamme comics that have not been translated into English. Since they are mostly his earlier works, I'm not expecting them to see a translation anyway. Van Hamme is known for his surprising and bold twists and turns, not just in the plots, but also in the way he approaches the complete genre. His first big success story, Thorgal, is a perfect example of this. It was far from a generic Viking story, though it was set in a time and a place that looks like it. Since its beginning, Thorgal has grown into an epic fantasy with many supernatural elements mixing Norse mythology, horror, old legends, and if as all that wasn't enough, there's even a tasty dose of science fiction blended in. Whenever you start the next Thorgal album, you have no idea what is coming. Thorgal is the only one of Van Hamme's big 3 series that I haven't completed yet. I do have many albums, but there are still many more to read. The first Thorgal story was published in 1977 in Tintin magazine. It was intended as a one-off story, but very enthusiastic reader feedback turned it into a long-running series. And as was the case with most of the popular stories in those magazines, they were later collected into albums. The first Thorgal album hit the shelves in 1980. But Jean Van Hamme's success wasn't an instant thing, and his route into comics was very distinct. He was born in 1939. The same year as the World War II started. So, at the time I'm filming this, he is 86 years old, and he is still writing comics. Before his breakthrough in comics, he had a successful career doing marketing and consultation for such global big companies like US Steel Corporation and Philips. And at that point in his life, writing was just his hobby that he did on the side. The first time Jean Van Hamme's name was seen at the cover of a comic book happened in 1968, when he was still working at the Philips, Belgium. It was an erotic comic book named Epoxy. Its heroine, the Epoxy, went through the whole comic book naked, having these adventures with Greek gods and goddesses. Van Hamme took the name Epoxy from a product that he had earlier promoted in Europe for US Steel Corporation. This product was made with epoxy resin and coal tar. The bad guy in the story was named Coal Tar. Van Hamme knew that at that point most of the Europeans hadn't heard of epoxy resin, so he thought that that sounded like a good name for the protagonist. He even included epoxy's chemical formula on the cover, but with Greek letters. Epoxy was published through a company that was a bit controversial at the time. It had also already published comics like Barbarella, a comic book that was later turned into a successful movie. And as it happens, Epoxy came out right after that Barbarella movie had hit the theaters. Also, the artist of Epoxy, Paul Cuvelier, was one of those important names working in Tintin magazine. So for a start as a comic book writer, everything looked very promising for Jean Van Hamme. But universe decided against it. You see, the year was 1968, and France was flooded with riots that almost turned into a revolution. And if you want to get a more detailed background for that, you can watch one of my previous videos. And as Van Hamme put it himself, other things were going on. A lot of noise welcomed the book, but it was not for the book. It took almost a decade and many more stories before Van Hamme saw the artwork of a Polish painter called Rosinski. Mr. Rosinski, I never knew you could sprain your tongue before I tried to pronounce that name. I may try it again later, someday. Anyway, Mr. Rosinski's style immediately got Van Hamme's attention. It was something he had never seen anyone doing in Western Europe. Their collaboration produced the world of Thorgal, which meant the true beginning of Van Hamme's decades-long success story within comics. Also, he had just resigned from his work at the corporate world, so he could focus solely on the writing. Between his failure with the Epoxy and the success of Thorgal, he wrote many comics, most of which will never be translated into English. There are a few exceptions though, like Story Without a Hero. It's available in English through Cinebook. I've had this comic in Finnish since my early childhood and it's very special for me. And therefore I already have a more focused video about this comic on my channel. And it also includes its second part 20 years later. But the truth about this is much more complicated. If you're interested, check out the video. But already, just this story alone shows you how Van Hamme is approaching certain genres from unexpected angles. Also, a story called The Great Power of Chninkel did get an English translation, but might be hard to find as it was published in Cheval Noir in the 90s. My copy here is in Finnish. Idea for this book came from Rosinski, who specifically wanted to make a black and white comic book. Van Hamme started to write the comic as a fantasy story, but decided later to mix in themes from the Bible. A colored version was also published later. The next big hit from Van Hamme was nothing like Thorgal. The premise for this story was pretty much copied from the Robert Ludlum book, The Bourne Identity. Yes, we are talking about that, Jason Bourne. And the connection is clear. The protagonist is washed ashore unconscious. He has a bullet wound in his head and he suffers from amnesia. And he has the number 13 tattooed on his body with Roman numbers. And the central plot is about 13 unraveling his true identity. 13 was first serialized in Spirou magazine in 1984 and published in album format later the same year. Very soon the readers found out that Bourne Identity was only the starting point for a long multi-album story that filled the pages with things like the Kennedy assassination and the conspiracy theories. It had influences from spy thrillers and Cold War politics, espionage, political and military secrets. And then there is the art. Wow. It's done by the William Vance, one of my all-time favorite European comics artists doing the drawing in realistic style. I'm pretty sure this is not the last of my videos to mention William Vance. His gritty yet smooth and action-packed style is important part of making 13 such a great read. Van Hamme's third hit series is as unexpected as they get. And it was based on his own novels that he wrote in the late 70s. And they didn't sell well. Still, many years later, in the 1990s, he decided to adapt them into comics anyway. Just the setting alone for the series, if I read the back cover of the comics, would be something that I'd probably skip, which I actually did for a long time. Maybe more on that later in the more focused video about the series. The story centers on Largo Winczlavs, a rebellious orphan of Yugoslav origin, who unexpectedly, after the mysterious death of his adoptive billionaire father, inherits a vast financial empire, the W Group. It's worth billions. And Largo is forced into the ruthless world of corporate boardrooms, hostile takeovers, and deadly conspiracies. He must navigate the global finance file, fending off enemies who want to see him and the W Group destroyed. Now this is where Van Hamme's past, working with the global corporations, really pays off. He turns a very believable business world and characters into a James Bond-style adventure, leaving a trail of dead bodies behind it. Later he wrote The Fortune of the Winczlavs. It's a 3-part series about the family's past. It's like the origin story and tells also how the W Group started and grew into a multi-billion company. And here I also need to bring back quickly the story without a hero. This story, although it was made long before the Largo Winch story, is today officially part of the Largo Winch world. It's a complicated thing. Check the video if you want to know more. As a writer, Van Hamme believes in controlling also the drawing process very closely. With new illustrators, he starts by writing a complete script, as he puts it himself. By complete script, I mean describing what to do in every single picture, panel, and square on the page. I am sort of a director. And he also adds, what is important when writing the script is that I write him a letter. It is addressed to him, and when I say the guy enters the room by the window, that's how I see it. If you prefer, he can enter the room through the door, but I prefer the window. He receives a personal script, so when he draws for me, not for the reader. I write for him and he draws for me. That doesn't make us friends, but it creates an understanding, and that's how it works, and it works very well. There are so many ways a writer-artist dynamic can happen, but obviously Jean Van Hamme has found a formula that, at least in his case, works, and it sells by the millions. Let's take a quick look at some of his other works that you should be aware of. Authorised Happiness. This series presents standalone stories set in a totalitarian near-future society where the state controls every aspect of life in the name of ensuring happiness. Each story explores a different facet of this authoritarian system, such as euthanasia, surveillance, and bureaucratic control, with a strong satirical tone. Think of it as a mix between Black Mirror and 1984, but in a comic form. This is one of those comics that I haven't got my hands on yet. Shelton. Wayne Shelton series stars this suave and seasoned and sharp-minded mercenary with a murky moral code. These stories are set in the modern world and see Shelton taking on high-risk missions like rescue operation, heist, and delicate political jobs, often in unstable or war-torn territories. Shelton uses his experience and charm and ruthlessness to outwit the enemies. As far as I know, 13 albums were published in French. Van Hamme wrote the 3 first. Then there was another writer doing some of the albums, and then Van Hamme came back and did the rest of them. Only some of the first albums are available in English through Cinebook. If you go to Cinebook website, they list the first 4 albums as available in English. But I have a 5th in English through Cinebook. I don't know what's going on there. But also at the back of the 5th, there is already an ad for the 6th one. Maybe they discontinued the series. I don't know. But the 5th came out and it's not listed on their website. Just in case you want to get your hands on all of these, there is the 5th one. Or maybe I got my hands on some super rare print and you can buy it for $1 million. Just kidding. It's not for sale. Lady S. It follows the adventures of Shania Rivgas, a beautiful multilingual young woman with a mysterious past. including times as a refugee and a thief, who unwillingly gets drawn into the world of shadowy European intelligence organization. This series is set against, again, real-world geopolitical backdrops, and it blends fast-paced action with political intrigue and, again, moral ambiguity. And as far as I know, 14 albums have been published in French, and 6 of them have been translated into English, and they're all available through Cinebook. Jean Van Hamme today is 86 years old, and he's still writing comics. But due to his old age, he has stopped writing for these long-running series. And he's focusing now only on one-off stories. As he himself put it, "I'm not ready to retire, but I can't start a new series at this age. So I'm doing different new things, which means it's a new world. I feel much younger because I am a beginner. And when you're a beginner, you feel younger. And this is very exciting." And you can find at least following one-off stories in English through Cinebook. I have to put a warning for this one as it contains sexual violence, even with children involved. Kivu is a fictional story with some real-life people mixed in. Van Hamme wrote the story to bring attention to the real-life horrors that regular people suffer in Democratic Republic of Congo due to its incredible riches in natural resources. Congo has abundance of rare earth minerals required to produce microchips for smartphones. None of that money ever reaches people of Congo, as corruption runs rampant with local militia, politicians, and the foreign mining companies. And the reality on the ground is really brutal for anyone who steps too close to these operations. It's a through and through downer. The horrors in these comics are there on purpose. Van Hamme wants to remind us all that all these horrors are everyday life for someone, just so that we can have the new smartphone with competitive pricing. Western, as the name implies, Western genre this time. It's a tragic family saga wrapped in a gunpowder and silence. A classic setup as the protagonist grows up to be hardened gunslinger seeking justice or revenge while confronting the ghost of his past. Another one that I haven't got my hands on yet. And to wrap up the list, there's Blake and Mortimer, one of the big old school Belgian classics. However, this series was not created by Jean Van Hamme. It was created by Edgar P. Jacobs and serialized in Tintin magazine in 1946. And later the stories were collected and published in album format. Edgar P. Jacobs is one of the names that require their own video. On top of his own series, he was also a very important piece of the success and history of Tintin comics. I have a bit more info about that dynamic in my Clear Line video. After Jacob passed away, Van Hamme was asked by the publisher to write more stories for the series, and Van Hamme was ecstatic. He got his first Blake and Mortimer when he was only 6 years old, and it made a huge impact on him. And now he was asked to keep the series alive. Van Hamme was clearly the perfect choice for this job. Anyone who has read even a single page of Blake and Mortimer knows what wordiness is. This job was designed for Jean Van Hamme. His first Blake and Mortimer album, The Francis Blake Affair, was a huge hit, and he's been writing more stories for the series ever since. However, he was not the only writer who was invited to write more stories for the series, a thing that he has openly commented on. Due to his old age, he has asked for the privilege of getting his stories published first. But so far, the publisher has been jumping back and forth between different creators. And these are Van Hamme's own word getting the Blake and Mortimer gig. I took it as an unexpected honor and a pleasure because they were heroes of mine since my early childhood. When years and years later you are responsible to continue the work, well, okay, you breathe a little bit and you think I could even say I could do it for nothing, which of course I didn't say. I was like an actor who has been ordered the role of Cyrano or King Lear, and I really enjoyed doing all that writing. It was a pleasure to be Jacobs, And that is all I have to say about Jean Van Hamme for now, as I really want to do separate, more focused videos for each of his series. But for now, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.